Hello and greetings, everyone. And thank you for taking the time to go through this series from One Faith, One People Ministries. My name is Andrew Gabriel Roth, and we've been going through this series called The Walking Dedicated Men. And this is part 5. The Star Catalogue of the Prophet Job. We got a lot to talk about, so let's get started. The first thing I wanted to do was to take us back to the pattern that we saw with respect to Adam's calendar system, which is why I've entitled this Back to Eden. However, there's a slight difference in this graphic from the one you saw before. As you can see, the trees are larger, okay? The tree of knowledge, the tree of life, and I've called them pillars. I'm about to talk about what we call the pillars of time. And as you can also see from this graphic, that it is representative of several aspects of a solar calendar. That you have an eastern gate, that's the one gate that Father Yah, he comes into, and that Adam and Eve are actually driven out of the eastern gate, and at the eastern gate we also see that there are angels with flaming swords, or cherubim with flaming swords, to keep the way to the tree of life here. These cherubim or angels with flaming swords, you have flame coming through the eastern gate. This is a reference to the sun and to the 2 annual cycles of the sun, okay? The daily rising and setting, and the annual cycling between equinoxes, whether going from fall to fall or spring to spring. And obviously in the west, we have Adam and Eve and the sun setting in the west here. So just wanted to remind you and have you pay attention to the 2 trees in the midst of the garden. As we talked about before, this is by the word in Hebrew that is tavek. Tavek means to be in the center of, in the middle of, okay? And the way the trees are described, it is, rather than having them side by side, it's up and down. But they also form, as I said, these pillars. So let's get into this. My introduction to the pillars of time. So the reason I brought back the Eden graphic, and again it's in a modified form, was to show how the trees of life and knowledge each hold up their part of the garden. As such, they serve as what we call pillars, from the Hebrew word amud, which is the verb for standing. So any straight standing structure is amud, or a pillar, covered by this word. As we also saw in the Adam teaching, the trees in Eden track the annual cycles of the sun from equinox to equinox. So they are literally pillars of time. Now I'm just going to skip back to that graphic for 2 seconds. I usually don't do this, but I think it's necessary to go back here. And what I mean by that is we've been talking about how at equinox, if you have this line, the horizon, on the equinox days, the sun will rise like this at 90 degrees, okay? And so the tree's placement cuts this circle. You have it cut in half here and then up and down here into, so that you are showing the cycling of time from going here to coming around here to coming back up here again, okay? So basically that is the 90-degree angle that I referenced, and we'll see that repeatedly as we go through this. Let's get back to where we were. This is also confirmed in the book of Exodus about the pillars of time. Where do we see the pillars of time in Exodus? There is a pillar of cloud to follow Israel by day and a pillar of fire to follow them by night. Day and night, the pillars are marking time. Now let's see how the prophet Job discusses the pillars of time. We read, "Then Job replied, though one wished to dispute with Father Yah. He could not answer him one time out of 1,000. His wisdom is profound. His power is vast. Who has resisted him and come out unscathed? He moves mountains without their knowing it, and overturns them in his anger. He shakes the earth from its place and makes its, there it is, its pillars tremble. He speaks to the sun, and it does not shine, and he seals off the light of the stars. So you mention the pillars here, and then right away we're talking about timekeeping mechanisms, the sun and the stars. He seals off the light of the stars. He alone stretches out the heavens. Scientists would call that the Big Bang, the beginning of time according to physics. And so by stretching out the heavens, it is another reference to time. And he treads on the waves of the sea. And here's something we're going to be looking at in detail. He is the maker of the Bear and Orion, the Pleiades, and the constellations of the south. Those are stars. So that's why it's the star catalog of Job. He performs wonders that cannot be fathomed, miracles that cannot be counted. And when he passes me, I cannot see him. And when he goes by, I cannot perceive him. Job 9, verses 1 through 11. Now, these pillars that were first mentioned that the earth was resting on, right? But they are actually, as I said, they are described in terms of the passage of time, not as necessarily as a physical thing that you rest the earth on, like it's a paperweight or something. So let's take a closer look. He speaks to the sun, and it doesn't shine. While this is definitely got a poetic flourish to it, it's also sort of describing a revelation-like disaster where the sun stops working, and we get that in Joel, and we get that in Acts, and some of these other places, Matthew 24. It's also true that from our standpoint on the earth, the sun stops shining. He speaks to the sun, and it doesn't shine after it sets for the day, when night comes. Even though it's technically still shining, we don't see it. He seals off the light of the stars. Next part. There's a couple of pieces to looking at this statement. The first is, same as above, stars rise and set. So when they set, he has sealed off their light. That's part one. Continuing on that, he seals off the light of the stars idea. The Hebrew word for seal is chatham, which specifically refers to a circular seal, like that of a king. You can read about that in 2 Kings 21, verse 8. Archaeologically speaking, we have found these actual seals from Hezekiah's time and later in Jerusalem, and they are cylindrical in nature, right? That's an important thing. These are circular seals. The seal gave a document, power, and instructions that had to be followed, right? Continuing on this, the seals off the light of the stars. Have a seal on the stars means to have, and we will see this directly, a circular boundary to them that is governed by natural law. The light is told where to go, where not to go, referring to the rising and setting of fixed stars. Similar language is used of the sun by David, as we will later see. And then we get this line. He alone stretches out the heavens. I believe this is a hint that the pillars are not really physical. If this verse is describing, for example, a continuously expanding universe, then the pillars would fall in the expansion. They would break. But as Job 9:6 verse says, the earth may get moved out of her place, and that is a frightening prospect. And the pillars may tremble or shake, but they never fall. They never fall or break. He is the maker of the Bear and Orion, the Pleiades, and the constellations of the south. As we will see later, the Bear, Orion, and the Pleiades were constellations that brought in the seasons. So this is why the NIV rendered this word cheder, which as constellations, but cheder actually means chamber. That's going to be an important concept. The sun and moon will also have chambers in Scripture. We'll see about this. And continuing, he's the maker of the Bear and Orion, the Pleiades, the constellations of the south. In another sense, the chambers of the south, because that's, again, cheder here, is referring to a specific series of constellations that Job and other ancients tracked throughout the year. And ancient mariners also used these stars to navigate. We'll get into that later. And here's the other reference to the pillars of time. He stretches out the north over the void. He hangs the earth on nothing. This is describing an unseen force that nevertheless has discernible impact on the objects around it. That's a very efficient description of either gravity or dark matter, or perhaps both. Then we get, he binds up the waters in his thick clouds, and the cloud is not rent under them. He covers the face of the moon and spreads over it his cloud. So now we see the moon begin to become increasingly more important. We talked about that at the end of Genesis 10 and 11, how we're starting to see references to the cycles of the moon. And in this case, the covering of the face of the moon is what we call lunar conjunction. That is exactly what conjunction is. The covering over of the face of the moon. A dark moon. And the Hebrew month starts from a dark moon. It is the sunset after dark moon, at which point your waxing crescent may or may not appear. That's a longer story. And that gets more into the calendar of Moses. And then he has described a circle upon the face of the waters at the boundary between light and darkness. So not only do the stars have that circular boundary, but so does light and darkness at the waters. Okay? Face of the waters. That Father Yah separated in Genesis 1, sky water from earth water. And what this also shows, because of this word, hug, that space is curved. We wouldn't know that until the early 20th century, when a 26-year-old Swiss patent clerk named Albert Einstein first started talking about that. Newton had no idea about space being curved. But the scripture, Job, and later Isaiah, they knew that space was curved. And then the pillars of heaven tremble and are astounded at his rebuke. So this has been from Job 26, verses 7 through 11. And it's only after this that those pillars of heaven are directly mentioned, after we've set up all of that astronomy, you might say. And yet, like in Job 9, all these references are about the cycles of the seasons on the earth and the cycles of the stars in the heavens. And all these descriptions bring us back to where we started. The pillars may tremble, but they never fall, they never break. This is because the pillars of time are actually part of the fabric of space itself. They are not resting in space. They are of space. So when the space stretches or shakes, the pillars stretch and shake with them, but are not destroyed. If you could imagine a tapestry with that has images of pillars on it, if the tapestry stretches, those pillars don't break or fall. They simply stretch with the fabric of that quilt, or whatever you want to call it. Again, Einstein will call that the weaving of space-time, but Job knew about it well before then. And that's why I say physics agrees. Space and time are one and the same thing. But before going deeper, we're going to do the tale of the tape. which means I think we should get a brief recap of Job, the story itself, to give the context in which the astronomical data is related. Our tale opens with a kind of documentary film feel, as the text describes the absolute fidelity and righteousness of Job, a leader in a land called Uz. And that land of Uz may have been named after a son of Aram, the son of Shem, the son of Noah. Genesis 10:21 through 23. Shortly after this, we are told of a very odd corporate meeting that happens in heaven, the only one of its kind recorded in Scripture to this level of detail. Daniel may give us a glimpse of that elsewhere. And in that corporate meeting, Satan comes to Father Yah as an employee giving an annual report, or maybe it's not annually, maybe it's daily or monthly, I don't know, but some type of regular reporting to his CEO. Satan's job is to probe humans for moral weakness as a kind of prosecuting attorney. And Father Yah kind of eggs Satan on a little bit, I think. And Yahweh said to Satan, because first he asks, where have you been? And like you don't know. And then Hasatan says, well, I've been roaming the earth, and whatnot. And Father Yah, what he's going to say here is, just in case you didn't catch it, I want to tell you about a guy that's really, really cool, and he's all about serving me. Have you considered my servant Eov, that's the Hebrew name for Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a perfect and straight man, one who fears Elohim and turns aside from evil? And Satan answered Yahweh and said, is Eov fearing Elohim for naught, for nothing? Have you not made a hedge around him and around his household and around all that he has on every side? And you have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But stretch out your hand, please, and strike all that he has, and see if he will not curse you to your face. And so the trials begin. So let's see what happens next. Basically, Father Yah is persuaded to let Satan take away all that Job has, almost everyone that he loves, and even his health, so long as Job himself is not killed. But for Job, the real pain hasn't even started yet. As three friends are coming to, quote, and there's a reason why I put that in quotes, console him and try to figure out why all has gone wrong. They start out as really good friends, waiting on Job, being so moved by his pitiful state that they neither speak to him nor prompt Job to speak to them for 7 days. It's sort of like, we're here, if you want to cry, cry, we're just sort of hanging out, because we care. But then, in chapter 3, Job begins to pour out his heartbreak. But when he's done, one by one, all of the friends will say, it's your fault, Job. You sinned. The central debate then for the next 29 chapters deals with Job's friends affirming Father Yah's righteousness, and that Job must have sinned to deserve this fate of his. Job, for his part, denies that he did wrong, but he does admit certain statements about Father Yah as being true, so that when they're describing how righteous Elohim is, Job agrees, but he can't process that and reconcile it with his current situation. And everyone is using time cycles, calendar codes, you might say, to prove their arguments, because they're basically saying, look at nature. Look at how great nature is. And understand that that came from our God. And since nature is beautiful, our God is beautiful. The situation then goes from bad to worse when a young man named Elihu, in chapter 32, he starts putting his own 2 cents in. And Elihu, who is the youngest of everyone there, is a fiery critic both of Job and everyone else. And the text tells us nothing about him. I think it's likely that he was a servant or attendant from one of the other friends. But when Elihu starts talking, he also proves that he knows his astronomy. This is what I mean. Universe according to Job and friends. Elihu says, "Can anyone understand the spreading of the clouds, the thundering of his pavilion?" The word Elihu uses for pavilion in Job 36:29 is a Hebrew word sukkah, which is the same word for tabernacle. Tabernacle is a form of temporary tent that the Israelites would dwell in. Now, I'm not just talking about the tabernacle that they dwelled in during the wilderness years. I'm talking about the holiday or the great feast called Sukkot, where you would literally build the sukkah. The tabernacle that Moses used in the wilderness is a different kind of tabernacle. It's called the Mishkan. Okay? And then there's a more generic Hebrew word for tent, which is ohel. So, not ohel. Ohel. Let's want to make sure I'm pronouncing that right. In any case, this word for sukkah is very important in describing the universe. King David will use that other Hebrew word ohel to describe a tabernacle or tent that Father Yah has pitched for the sun. Psalm 19 is one of the most amazing astronomy texts ever written. And in that, David will describe the solar year with perfect accuracy, dovetailing with Adam's calendar and pointing to Elihu as having this information as well. The pavilion of the universe, the sukkah. Also, Job was the first biblical book other than Joseph's dream in Genesis 37, and there's a bit of a debate as to who comes first. I believe that Joseph is after Job's time. And in the book of Job, he mentions the stars directly in a pure calendrical capacity. Prior to this, Genesis only said that the stars had some sort of a timekeeping function and give light to the earth. But now we're actually naming names and giving out jobs to the stars. We read here, "Is not Elohim in the height of the heavens? Look also at the leading stars, how high they are." Now that's actually my translation, which I say here. Matara is my personal Tanakh translation project. Almost all other translations will render Eliphaz's phrase, Rosh Chochavim, as distant stars. But the fact that they are also very high, that's what Eliphaz also says, suggests a different, more literal reading. The word that is used, Rosh, means head, first, leader, chief. Like the head of the year, Rosh Hashanah, Jewish New Year, in the fall. By either reading, then, a chief star or a leader of the stars, a leading star that is high, suggests that these stars are particularly important in ordering around the year, the seasons. In contrast, distant stars seems unlikely. The ancients wouldn't know what was truly distant, only what is bright or what is high, and if it's too far away that it's twinkling in the background, how does it lead? But other information in Job tells us more about these leader stars, particularly what part of the sky they are in. This goes back to the statement in Job 22:12 of, again, what part of the sky? How high they are. There are certain stars that never set, literally because they are so high, they are tied to the extreme north. We call these stars circumpolar, which means they follow the north pole of the North Star. A circumpolar star, to give this dictionary definition, is a star that is viewed from a given latitude on Earth, never sets, that is, never disappears below the horizon, due to its proximity to one of the celestial poles. Circumpolar stars are therefore visible from said location towards the nearest pole for the entire night on every night of the year. and would be continuously visible throughout the day too, were they not overwhelmed by the sun's glare. Continuing this definition. All circumpolar stars are within the circumpolar circle. This was in fact the original meaning of the term Arctic Circle. This is important. Before the current geographical meaning, Circle of the Bears, Ursa Major, the Great Bear, and Ursa Minor, the Little Bear, from the Greek Arctikos, near the bear, according to Wikipedia. So we have a bear, a great bear, right? Where have we heard about the bear? In Job, maybe. Maybe here. He is the maker of Arctikos, Bear, Orion, Pleiades, constellations of the south. And Job did pass this info down, but before I get to that, you may have noticed in some of your older Bible translations, like King James, I believe, is one of them, that it says Arcturus for one of the stars. Well, Arcturus is Arctikos, bear. That's where that comes from. But let me show you how Job passed this information down. This is Isaiah, Yeshayahu. How you have fallen from the heavens, O Hallel, or Lucifer, son of the morning. You have been cut down to the ground. You have laid low the Gentiles. For you have said in your heart, let me go up to the heavens, and let me raise my throne above the stars of El, the stars of God. So, that phrase is really important, the stars of El. And let me sit on the mount of meeting on the sides of the north. There it is again. Let me go up above the heights of the clouds. Let me be like the Most High. Isaiah 14:12 through 14. So these stars are described as a fixed boundary that never sets. Then the prophet Obadiah confirms that in his fourth verse. Though you rise as high as the eagle, Obadiah says, and though you set your nest among the stars, from there I shall bring you down, declares Yahweh. And then we have this. When the morning stars, Bocher, right? Kokavi, Bocher, sang together, and all the sons of Elohim shouted for joy. Job 38, verse 7. According to the book of Job, that bit of information came directly from the mouth of Father Yah himself. And there are two very important morning stars known in the ancient Middle East. The first is the planet Venus, which is included in the Hebrew term mazalot, which can refer to either stars or planets. That's in 2 Kings 23, verse 5. The Septuagint, however, the Greek Old Testament translation from the Hebrew, they took the Hebrew word mazalot and simply put letter for letter in Greek mazaroth, which is the Hebrew word for constellations in Job 38:32. And why did they do that? Because the ancients called planets wandering stars. So a planet was a star, and obviously our own sun is a star. And then once in 2 Peter and twice in the book of Revelation, the morning star, was probably Venus in these cases, is used in the New Testament as a metaphor for our Savior, Yeshua HaMashiach. But the second well-known and important morning star is known as Sirius, or the dog star. And it has a direct linkage to Moses, and even times far earlier than Moses. Around 3100 BC, the ancient Egyptians noticed that the star Sirius, the dog star, had a unique capability. All other stars would drift 1 degree backwards every 72 years from their fixed location on the Earth. We call this phenomenon the precession of the equinoxes. The backwards drift was due to the 23.5 degree tilt of our axis, turning in space. But Sirius was different. It moved so fast and so powerfully in the opposite direction It compensated for the precession and stayed in its place. The Egyptians then built their entire calendar system around what we call in astronomy the heliacal rising, or the return of this star after about 70 days' absence, just before sunrise. Because it's just before sunrise, it is known as a morning star in many cultures. I should point out that is also in the writings of Josephus and Philo. They are Jewish historians. They knew about these morning stars. Part of the reason that Sirius was also reliable was because it was 40 degrees below the belt of what we now call the zodiac. So it wasn't as affected by these shifts as these other constellations were. Instead, Sirius returned to its origin point from one heliacal rising to the next, exactly 365.25 days after its previous heliacal rising. That is the average year according to our older Julian calendar. Now, that's not completely accurate to our actual solar year, but it's pretty good. It was Sirius's reliability that enabled the Egyptians to accurately predict the length of the solar year. And it would be Prince Moses, who knew all the wisdom of the Egyptians, that's what Stephen says, Acts 7 verse 22, which would by definition include their astronomy. And you can't know their astronomy without knowing about this star Sirius. But Job knew of it before Moses. David wrote about it too. But first, let's see the Jewish historians recording from the first century what they knew about this. Josephus and Philo. We read here, for instance, the name of the dog is beyond all question a homonymy, meaning a sound-alike device, inasmuch it comprehends many dissimilar things which are signified by that appellation or sound. This is, by the appellation means name, but I'm saying the sound of the name. This is Philo talking here. For there is a terrestrial barking animal called a dog. There is also a marine monster with the same name, and there is also a star in heaven, a dog star, see, which poets call the autumnal star, because it rises at the beginning of autumn, for the sake of ripening the fruits and bringing them to perfection. Philo is talking about the end of the dog days of summer. The dog days of summer are actually named after the dog star Sirius. And Josephus' reference is this, and with springs that never fail to run, even when the torrents fail them, as they do in the dog days. So this is talking about the floods of fall. You know, we talk about the early and the late rains in the Torah, and these are the early rains after the grape harvest. And this is according to what I've abbreviated TJW, the Jewish War, Book 3, verse 45. But in another book, Antiquities of the Jews, Book 1, verse 71, Josephus also explains that Adam predicted the exact day of the flood, inscribing it on a pillar that is still in the land of Siriad, the land where they follow the star Sirius to this very day. That's what Josephus says. Only Egypt built their calendar by following Sirius. So Josephus understands this linkage. He understands how they use this star. And he understands how Moses learned to use this star. So with Sirius as a morning star in the book of Job, because there's really these two major ones, now there are not only two, but by talking about morning stars in this context, Job is showing us that he understands this heliacal rising, and he would certainly understand the two most prominent morning stars. The ancients could use these stars to track the year. It rose at pre-dawn at the start of summer. It set pre-dusk around fall. You know, Philo does talk about it rising at autumn, but Josephus talks about it in a different context. And the bottom line is that by following when the stars rise and set, you can tell what season you are in. Now let's see how Sirius ways passed down to David and Solomon. In Psalm 59, verse 6, David says, "They return at evening, and they howl like a dog, and they go around the city." Seems like a pretty prosaic comment. But what's intriguing about Psalm 59 is that while the Egyptians used Sirius as a sunrise marker, the Hebrews counted their days from sunset. This explains, so that when you get these other references, like in Philo, about the rising of that at autumn, Philo is saying basically that it will rise around autumn, but also when the sun sets that day, it is close to autumn. So there's a bit more going on with that than I want to get into. But in any case, David adapts Sirius from a morning star to an evening star by talking about the return of the dog at evening when it goes around the city. And then there's this psalm. At evening they return, they howl like a dog. There it is again. And they go around the city. They wander up and down for food and wine if they are not satisfied. And I sing of your power. And in the morning I sing aloud of your kindness. For you have been my strong tower and my refuge, and in the day of my distress. O my strength, to you I sing praises. For Elohim is my strong tower, my Elohim, my God of kindness. Psalm 49. So the kindness, in part, I believe, at least involves the abundant fruit of summer leading to the bountiful final harvest in the autumn. And now, Solomon has a bit more of a crass, gross way of explaining how his dog star returns. As a dog returns to its own vomit, Solomon says, so a fool returns or repeats his folly. Proverbs 26:11. Gross? Absolutely. But also, believe it or not, astronomically accurate. To put not too fine a point on the matter, dogs tend to return to their waste where they live. So they are returning to their home area in that metaphor. It's the dog star Sirius returns to its home area in the eastern sky 365.25 days from when it was last there. I should also point out that it's pretty easy to link the dog going around the city to the solar year. Why would I say that? I mean, it seems like an odd metaphor, but there is such a thing as the city of the sun in the scriptures. At that time, Isaiah says, 5 cities in the land of Egypt will speak the language of Canaan and swear allegiance to Yahweh, who commands the armies. One will be called the city of the sun. Now, the NET Bible also has this helpful footnote for the verse. The Hebrew text has Ir ha-Hares, the city of destruction. See NASB and NIV. But this does not fit the positive emphasis of verses 18 through 22. The Qumran scroll, which is to say the Dead Sea Scrolls, 1Q, Isaiah, and some medieval Hebrew manuscripts read Ir ha-Keres, the city of the sun. See, look at this. City of the sun and city of destruction. See how close they are? The city of the sun, Heliopolis. This reading also finds support from Symmachus' Greek version. Let me explain about Symmachus. When we think about the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament, we tend to think of the entire Old Testament. The fact of the matter is that they only translated the first 5 books of Moses in Alexandria, Egypt, during the reign of Ptolemy II or Ptolemy Philadelphus. The rest of the scriptures was translated gradually over the next, say, 2 centuries. And one of the chief translators for the rest of the scriptures was a guy named Symmachus. So he is translating from the prophets. And so he says he finds support for that City of the Sun reading from Symmachus' Greek version, from the Targum, which would have been the Targum Jonathan on the prophets. That's an Aramaic version of Isaiah. And the Vulgate, Latin version. So since the right reading is, I believe, the City of the Sun, when the dogs, Sirius, go around the city, this is a strong metaphor for the return of that star, the dog star, to the same sunrise on the same solar day. In ancient times, there were 2 methods by which the progress of the year could be learned from observation of the heavens. The sun was for seasons, and the change in its place of rising or of setting supplied the first method. The second method was supplied by the stars. For as the Hebrew shepherds, and again, this is a quote that I'm reading. This is not just my words. This is someone else's words, actually. For as the Hebrew shepherds, such as Jacob, Moses, David, and Amos, kept watch over their flocks by night, they saw the silent procession of the stars through the hours of darkness, and knew without a clock or timepiece how they were progressing. They noticed what stars were rising in the east, what stars were culminating in the south, what were setting in the west, and how the northern stars, always visible like a great dial, were turning. But as the eastern horizon began to brighten towards the dawn, they would specially note what stars were the last to rise before their shining was drowned in the growing light of day. These, the last stars, appear in the east before sunrise, were the morning stars, the heralds of the sun. As morning followed morning, these morning stars would be seen earlier and earlier, and therefore for a longer time before they disappeared in the dawn. Until some morning, other stars, unseen before, would shine out for a few moments, and thus supplant the stars seen earlier as the actual heralds of the sun. Such a first appearance of a star was termed by the Greek astronomers its heliacal rising, the term that we've been using. And the mention in the scriptures of the morning stars or stars of the twilight, Job 38 verse 7, but also 3 verse 9, shows that the Hebrews, like the Greeks, were familiar with this feature of the ordinances of heaven, which, by the way, are also mentioned in the book of Job, and noted the progress of the year by observation of the apparent changes of the celestial host. One star would herald the beginning of spring, another the coming of winter. The time to plow, the time to sow, the time of the rains would all be indicated by successive morning stars as they appeared. And that's according to ISBE Bible Encyclopedia. Mainstream, reliable source. And that is correct. So this brings us to what we call now the final star catalog. Let's recap our catalog so far. Job has stars that never set, the circumpolar stars. Morning stars, including Sirius, which has a 365.25 day yearly cycle. It is the first book to mention the month based on the moon directly. And it refers to planets like Venus. Job, like Einstein, as we saw, knows that the universe is curved space, 22 verse 14. And Job mentions leading stars, Mazzaroth or constellations, and chambers that neatly divide up the night sky to help us tell time and determine the seasons. And it's on this last point that we now turn to naming these actual stellar entities. In order to do so, a word of appreciation should be offered to the Hebrew scholars who translated the Tanakh, the Hebrew scriptures, into Greek. When that project began about 260 BCE, it was very near Alexandria, Egypt, and her world-famous library. The Hebrew scholars were able to describe to their Greek friends the stars of Job, and they got the terms down. As a result, I believe, we really do have a high degree of certainty regarding which Greek constellations related to the ones the Hebrews knew. So, moving on to this next point, we actually referenced this earlier, that the Hebrew word Aish in Job 38:32 is the great bear, because it becomes, in translation, Arcturus, bear circle, in the Greek. As we also saw earlier, the job of the great bear leading outer clouds was to point to the North Star and the circumpolar stars that never set. It is a northern compass point. In another one, Chadari Timan, right, the chambers of the south, those are the constellations of what we call the zodiac, the southern zodiac, opposite Orion, and so on. And then there is Kima, the Pleiades, the eastern constellation that indicates the start of spring and is used in that context in Job 38:31. Now the Pleiades actually looks like an arrow-shaped shovel, and when it's set anciently in the late afternoon, and it doesn't do this now, by the way, its disappearance told the ancients that the shovel has gone under the horizon, into the earth, the time to harvest. Spring is close. And that's what it looks like. Just to give you an idea. That's why I say sort of like an arrow-shaped shovel. It sets earlier and earlier each night throughout the winter time until when it sets in the late afternoon and the sun goes down and you don't see this, you know your shovel has gone into the earth. Time to plant. And then there's this very interesting one, Kesel, Orion, the hunter of the western sky. And this would have been very well known by Moses, because like Sirius, this is a very important constellation. In fact, this is one of the most important constellations the Egyptians used. Orion was where the pharaohs went to die. The word for death in ancient Egyptian, it was actually to go west, and the western sky was represented by Orion. Okay? But while Orion has all these mythological associations, the Hebrews turned myth on its head. Let me show you. They named Orion not after a mighty hunter or a god, but by the word Kesel, which means fool. Because for the Hebrews, it literally was foolishness and sin to name the stars after false gods or demigod heroes who never existed. But next up, we have a constellation that actually encircles both the north and south celestial poles. It's called Lachash Bariach, the fleeing or crooked serpent. Quote, the direct references to these old constellation forms in Scripture are not numerous, but one of the clearest is in Job 26:13, where the crooked serpent is used as the correlative of garnished the heavens, the great constellation of the writhing dragon placed at the crown of heavens being used, metaphorically, as an expression for all the constellations of the sky. For by its folds it encircles both the poles, that of the equator and that of the ecliptic. There are a series of archaeoastronomers and biblical scholars who also think that the serpent in Eden represents, not only, what I want to say is, not that the story of Adam and Eve and the serpent isn't literally historically true, it is, but a number of scholars have also made the connection with one of these dragon or serpent constellations, okay? And this particular one, as we see from ISBE Encyclopedia, encircles both the poles, that of the equator and that of the ecliptic. And so here is what these stars in the book of Job do for the ancients. They give us the directions of the compass. Aish, the great bear, northern sky. Chadari Timan, chambers of the south, southern sky. Kima, the Pleiades, eastern sky. Kesel, or Orion, the fool of the western sky. Lachash Bariach, the fleeing crooked serpent, the north and south poles. In conclusion, the stars mentioned in Job were more than sufficient for ancient biblical people to use to track the seasons of the years. Combined with the previous systems of Adam, Enoch, and Noah, the Job system represents a quantum leap forward in astronomical sophistication, and a fulfillment of all signs. Remember, signs, seasons, days, and years in Genesis chapter 1. The system also forms a vital bridge from those earliest days to the patriarchal age. Now that we know how to use the stars in Job, we will next meet the man who is literally called the Exalted Father, the Father of the Stars, a man named Abraham. And then we will have 4 generations of intensive calendar development. Join me in part 6 then for Abraham Counts the Stars. Coming up next. Meanwhile, again, thank you very much for your kind attention. I'm Andrew Gabriel Roth, and I hope you'll take a moment to find out more about subscribing to my weekly and Torah New Testament teachings at onefaith.onepeopleministries.com. And there's lots of free bonus material like the stuff that you're watching at that location. Thanks very much for listening. I'm Andrew Gabriel Roth, and have a great day. Take care.